Good afternoon and welcome to the Indigenous Works webinar about getting started in Indigenous engagement and employment, readiness and recruitment strategies. Indigenous Works is a not-for-profit ISCO certified organization with the mandate to improve the inclusion and engagement of Indigenous people in the Canadian economy. Since 1998, it has developed many tools and services designed to help companies and organizations improve their Indigenous recruitment and workplace inclusion strategies. We take an organizational development or an OD approach to Indigenous engagement and employment. We work with corporate Canada and Indigenous groups. With one foot in the corporate world and one foot in the Indigenous world, our ability to understand both corporate and Indigenous perspectives is what makes us different. Visit our website for more information at www.indigenousworks.ca. The webinar today will start by reviewing some barriers you may encounter in your Indigenous recruitment efforts and what to do about them. We'll look at some recent census data on the Indigenous population and talk about some other information that will also help you prepare for Indigenous recruitment. Then we'll get into some specific strategies that will help you recruit Indigenous people. Toward the end of our presentation, we'll also explain how Indigenous Works can help you with Indigenous recruitment. So let's begin. A few points you should know about the recent census. The Indigenous population grew from 1.4 to 1.673 million since the last census. Overall, that's 42% growth over 10 years. The current census shows that the Indigenous population is young. They have an average of 31 years, which is almost a decade younger than the rest of the Canadian population. The Métis population grew by 51% over the past 10 years. 3/4 of the First Nations population have registered status. 44% of First Nations are on reserve. There are more Indigenous women than there are men. One of the census facts that is important to note has to do with Aboriginal languages. There are 70 Aboriginal languages. This is true evidence of the diversity of Indigenous peoples across the country. Recognizing that language is such a vital part of a nation's culture, we see in this language diversity that Indigenous culture is far from being homogeneous. In fact, companies working with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit across the country may require that you pay more attention to recruitment strategies that are regionally nuanced. Let's talk for a minute about the implications of the census numbers for your Indigenous recruitment and workplace strategies. The diversity of Indigenous peoples means it's important to develop niche strategies. The number of Métis in use suggests that you may want to develop recruitment and attraction strategies that are focused on these groups. Urban versus rural strategies may need to be developed since the employment goals and needs of each of those segments may be different as well. Maybe your company has tried Indigenous recruitment before and you encountered some problems. Maybe that experience has now translated into some internal resistance or trying again. Let's review why the current climate is different and better than before. Listen to John DiGiacomo, the Executive Director of the Anishinaabeg Employment and Training Services, talk about ASETS, Aboriginal Skills and Development Training Strategy.
So Anishinaabeg Employment and Training Services is part of a network of assets, Aboriginal Skills Employment Training Agreements across Canada. So it's a network of over 60 ASETA holders with representing over 1 million citizens in the country. So AETS works with partners in a variety of different sectors, and really it's all size of organizations. So we work to small, medium size, as well as large corporations, in order to ensure that we help citizens that are out of work, out of school, to work. And really that inclusivity of having an employer participate or work with us to help the employer get a workforce that better reflects the population is what we're all about. So AETS has staff that are there to help business, it's there to help collaborate with government, to help ensure inclusion is happening. Diversity really brings strength, and certainly with inclusion and helping employers follow an inclusion continuum, it really helps that employer become diverse, ensuring that, yes, those First Nation, Métis or Inuit have that opportunity to be in the workplace and make a difference, which really, again, that diversity really brings strengths to the organization.
The Indigenous population now represents a diverse, larger, and more educated talent pool than before, and their growth is assured. It's also important to highlight that the strategies to attract urban and reserve populations might be different. It's now about a 50-50 split, with half living in towns and cities and 50% living in rural areas. We advocate that your company engages in a dialogue and exercise to formally respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This will require a dialogue with your company. In our last webinar, we gave some background on the Commission and why it's important for you to know about it. You can see the Indigenous Works webinar about the Commission by going to this link, indigenousworks.ca/en/employment-training. It's not mandatory to have this dialogue in your workplace, but we encourage it for several reasons. By doing so, it will bring resolve to your Indigenous attraction and recruitment strategies. Plus, a side benefit is that it will build your employment brand. In order to respond to calls to action, particularly call to action number 92, it is important to start by assessing where your company is at right now. What are you doing that responds to this call to action? And what could you do in the future? This internal exercise will actually help you prepare your team and workplace to start building the right engagements and partnerships for Indigenous recruitment. The success of your Indigenous employment strategies really depends on the quality of strategic partnerships you have struck. The right partnerships will help you reach the talent you are looking for in the right ways. Through your engagement efforts with Indigenous organizations, you will get to know more Indigenous people and develop a more thorough understanding of what Indigenous people are looking for in you as an employer of choice. Listen to Gary McDermott, Access Director of Programs, as he talks about his ASET organization and what his group does to build engagements and relationships with companies.
Knowing what the needs of that particular sector are. So when we engage with an employer, we want to find out what kind of jobs they're going into. So are they entry level? Are they skilled trades? We want to make sure that we're knowledgeable as an Indigenous organization about the needs of the industry partner. We don't want there to be a mismatch in skills, so we want this to be successful. So we find out from the employer, what the skill requirements are, where the job site is, all of those things. And then, work with the employer and make sure that we, recruit the right people and make sure that they have the right skill set, they have the right tools and equipment when they show up at work, and we don't want to let the employer down. So, we want to send the right candidates with the right set of skills, and we want it to be successful. And so we will engage with that partner, and we're hoping that we get that same level of engagement from that employer partner.
We mentioned earlier in the presentation about the growing numbers of Métis people which self-identified in the census. So attraction and recruitment strategies developed with that group in mind may be an effective approach. Here again, it is important to identify the different organizations which are important to Métis people and to see what resources they may offer which could assist you. Here are some examples of organizations which work with women, are focused on them, or offer services which are directed to them or benefit them. The more you learn about these different organizations and network with them, the more sophisticated and effective your attraction and recruitment strategies will become. We saw from the census figures how the young Indigenous population is. So, to the extent it's possible, your attraction and recruitment strategies need to consider the youth audience. There are specific organizations, like Careers, the Next Gen, that have a youth career focus. Canada's Aboriginal TV network has some great shows which are watched by youth and would make a good place to advertise. We have mentioned employment brand a number of times. We cannot overstate enough how important it is to get this right. Indigenous people share among themselves about which companies are a good place to work for, and word travels fast. So you need to do some advanced planning to build that brand and establish a reputation that speaks well of your company. Here are 3 different ways to develop your brand. Develop partnerships with Indigenous organizations or businesses. Build visibility in Indigenous publications to create presence. Establish your Indigenous network by linking with organizations, e.g. youth. How do you get better recruitment results? One answer is that you need to emphasize your workplace advantage, and the advantage needs to be considered from an Indigenous perspective. So for example, let's say your company offers internship opportunities for Indigenous youth. That's an advantage you may have over other employers. Promote that as part of your narrative about why you are an employer of choice from the Indigenous perspective. Here's 5 questions which will inform on your company's Indigenous advantage. How are you supporting or investing in Indigenous communities? What supports do you offer for Indigenous people to advance? What do Indigenous people say or think about your company? Do you have an Indigenous employee network or something similar? Do you purchase from Indigenous suppliers and contribute to Indigenous causes, communities, or organizations? Your communications themes and your attraction and recruitment strategies should convey the reasons why your company wants to hire Indigenous people. Why do you want to hire Indigenous people? We assume that these hires are based on merit and a desire to find the right fit for the opportunities that you offer. This conveys something quite different compared to a rationale which focuses on, say, employment equity legislation as your main driver for Indigenous hiring. In other words, you are hiring Indigenous people because you believe in a diverse workforce versus you need to hire to satisfy EE regulations. Willingness and merit versus compliance. And another point, as you get your messaging clear on Indigenous hiring, are you involving your leadership in your communications? It's important to do so. Another effective strategy is this. It's a good idea to encourage internal recommendations. The best way to do so is through incentives. For example, you can offer additional holiday time or professional training. Another consideration in developing your strategies is to focus extensively on Indigenous media as a place to advertise or promote your employment brand. Niche media on the web or in social media present good channels to promote your job opportunities, your employment brand, and your workplace profile. Here's a few examples of Indigenous media in different parts of the country. Our 7-stage inclusion continuum is the heart of our workplace system, offering a roadmap to workplace inclusion and a way to benchmark your own Indigenous employment strategies and practices. We started stage 1 with an indifferent company, and by stage 7, we have a company where Indigenous inclusion is fully embraced as the cultural norm. We offer advisory services and will work with companies who are new to Indigenous employment in any of the following ways. Indigenous employment strategies. We develop and design Indigenous employment strategies, recruitment, advancement, and retention. Indigenous workplace inclusion. We do an assessment of your workplace. Baseline inclusion measurement using our 7-stage inclusion continuum. Cultural awareness training. We offer training customized to your needs. For companies that already have some experience in Indigenous employment and want to do more, we have more in-depth advisory tools to offer. Indigenous Employment Systems Review, a comprehensive review to ensure that your employment practices are nuanced to Indigenous needs. Indigenous Workplace Barometer. Staff interviews and a proprietary 9-point methodology is used to analyze the critical barriers you are encountering in your Indigenous employment efforts. The rise in Indigenous population numbers highlights the need for specific Indigenous recruitment strategies. We offered a few executable attraction and recruitment tips today. More than just recruitment strategies per se, we said that your recruitment successes have much to do with your employment brand, your understanding of the employment needs of the groups that make up the population, niche strategies directed to those groups, network, positioning, and your communications. We can help you with your Indigenous engagement strategies, employment strategies, and workplace inclusion efforts. Getting started is sometimes the hardest part. Equipping yourself with the right knowledge and familiarizing yourself with Indigenous people, their history, and current landscape is a good foundation. Please feel free to contact us today to discuss your needs and hear more about how we can help. You can call us or email us. For more information, you can also visit our website at indigenousworks.ca. We want to thank you for listening to our webinar today. Miigwech.